Chapter 1. Curiosity and the Unexpected Result. I remembered the day I ordered the DNA kit like it was nothing more than a harmless whim. It came from a coupon in a magazine. Unlock your ancestry for only $39. And I thought, why not? My life felt settled. I had a good job, a small apartment in town, friends, a little dog named Nolan. My parents were good people, gentle and loving, though not especially close. We had polite dinners and light conversation, but rarely the kind of deep emotional intimacy I saw other families share. I wondered about lineage and health, the stories I might learn, the ways in which my past shaped me. So I chewed the swab, sealed it, mailed it off. I didn't expect anything to happen. I didn't expect a long phone call from the Ancestry site, saying I had no genetic link to the people who raised me. No matching DNA with either of them. 0. There wasn't a misprint. There wasn't faulty swab. There was a blank on every test, like someone had entirely replaced me or swapped the bloodline before I even existed. My knees buckled. I dropped onto the kitchen floor, staring at the swab envelope, wondering if the world could break this smoothly. I replayed everything. The lullabies my mom sang. The vacations we took. The birthday cakes. The way my dad joked about me as a kid learning to tie my shoes. Were those just performances? Memories constructed around an illusion? I spent hours staring at their faces on family photos. Holiday albums, baby pictures, awkward prom Polaroids. I pictured the doctor in the delivery room. I pictured my fetus on an ultrasound. I pictured the hospital birth certificate. And then I pictured the test results. All of it connected. They belonged together. Except maybe I didn't. By the time I dared to call my mom, my voice had already changed. I asked her if she'd done a DNA test. She laughed nervously. Said not everyone did that. Encouraged me. Said she'd support anything that made me happy. She did not ask about the results. She did not mention the test kit. It was April when the results came in. I didn't see them until a week later, when I dared log back in. 2 exact matches from people I'd never heard of, both sharing half my genome. First cousins, both living in different states. Then dozens of more distant relatives tagged by the site. And not a single match labeled mom or dad. I sat numbly for hours, the screen alive with names I didn't know. They lived in small towns. One lived in Texas. One in upstate New York. They all looked confused when I reached out. At first I messaged politely. Hi, I don't know if this is strange to ask, but I think you may be a relative. My ancestry report shows I'm connected to your family tree. Would you mind if we talked? The responses came in flood. People asked, are you sure? And did they trick you? And one woman said, we haven't had a missing person for decades. One man apologized. I'm so sorry. Turns out your DNA aligns with my father's side. And he had a child out of state before he married my mom. It was early May when I booked a flight, the first time I'd meet part of my actual biological family. I called my dad beforehand. I need to understand something, I stammered. If this all checks out, maybe I'm not yours. But I need to ask, will you still love me? He paused. Then he said, of course. He paused again. I may not be your father by blood, but I raised you. You'll always be mine. I didn't know how to feel. By the time I landed in Texas, I had names and phone numbers. I had addresses. I had a knot in my chest that felt like betrayal and hope squeezed together. When I walked through the front door of the woman who'd been described to me as my own sister, she hugged me like I belonged there, but I still felt an outsider. My biological family embraced photos of me from childhood, explaining looks and traits I'd always chalked up to recessive genes. They told stories I'd never heard about my birth mother, who had me before high school ended and gave me up for adoption so I could have a better life. They cried gently and told me they'd been looking for me. I carried photo albums. I carried receipts and years of loyalty to the people who raised me. Ever since I returned home, I've wondered, what does it mean to be born into one family and grown into another? Chapter 2. The silence in the kitchen. The morning after I came back from Texas, I sat at the kitchen table of the house I grew up in, with a cup of coffee that tasted too bitter. My mom stood by the sink in her robe, wiping down a clean counter for the third time. She didn't ask about the trip. She didn't mention the test. She just said, "How was your flight?" There was an unnatural stillness between us. The kind of stillness that feels like something enormous is pressing down on the ceiling, just out of sight. "I met them," I said, keeping my voice low. "They showed me pictures of my biological mother. Her name was Angela. She had me when she was 17. My mom didn't flinch. She just nodded, her back still to me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg her to turn around and look me in the eye. But instead I said, 'Why didn't you tell me I was adopted?' She put the towel down slowly and turned. Her face looked softer than I remembered. Not guilty, not ashamed, just very, very tired. 'You were never a secret,' she said. 'Just sacred.' That word hit me like glass. I couldn't tell if it was beautiful or manipulative. 'You had no right,' I said. 'We were told, by the agency, to raise you as our own, to give you a normal life. You were a miracle to us. After so many years of infertility, you were everything. We thought if we told you, you'd feel like less.' But it was still a lie," I said. She sat down across from me. For a while we just looked at each other. And then she said, "We tried to tell you once. You were 8. But you were already so attached, so full of questions we couldn't answer. You cried when a cartoon mom left her baby on a doorstep. You said, 'A real mom would never do that.' After that, we couldn't bring ourselves to shatter what you had. But you shattered it anyway." She looked down at her hands. Her fingers trembled just slightly. "Does Dad know I know?" She shook her head. I couldn't tell him. He didn't want to revisit it. He was always afraid this day would come. I leaned back in my chair. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, saturated, full of all the years I'd lived not knowing, and the quiet, aching knowledge that they had watched me grow up every day with the weight of that secret pressing against their hearts. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up scrolling through old pictures. Me in kindergarten with a crooked tooth, dressed as a bee for Halloween. My dad holding me after a softball game. My mom fixing my hair for graduation. And yet now, every photo looked different. The context had shifted. They weren't parents caught candidly in time anymore. They were actors in a delicate, long-term play. Loving me, yes, but always managing the edge of a secret they never meant to expose. And still I couldn't hate them. Not fully. That was the hardest part. I wasn't furious. I was unmoored. The next day, I called Angela's family again. My birth aunt, Rachel, answered. She said, "You sounded just like her. When you told me your name, I cried for 2 hours." She didn't want to keep me? No, it wasn't that. She couldn't. Our parents were strict. She was barely 17. They said they'd disown her. She never even held you. They made her sign the papers in the hospital. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall. Rachel continued. She never stopped thinking about you. She died when she was 25 in a car accident. But I promise, she loved you. It was the first time I cried since the results. I cried for a mother I never met. For a version of me who grew up in another house, another name. For the parents who raised me in good faith, but with silence and fear stitched into every bedtime story. For the woman who gave me life and couldn't hold me. And mostly, I cried because I didn't know what any of it meant anymore. Who was I, really? Chapter 3. The Photograph in the Attic. A few days passed after that conversation with Rachel. I went back home, to my apartment, my job, my city. But everything around me felt slightly off. Like my life was a sweater I'd been wearing for years. Only now I could see the loose threads unraveling in the seams. The little rituals I used to take comfort in, morning coffee, weekend grocery runs, checking the mailbox, suddenly felt hollow. I was someone else now. Not entirely. but not entirely who I thought I was either. My adoptive parents didn't call. I didn't reach out either. I needed space. They seemed to understand that. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they were just afraid of saying the wrong thing. The silence between us was loud. One Saturday, I drove back to the old house to pick up some of my things. Childhood books, a few photo albums, the kind of sentimental stuff I'd left behind years ago but couldn't quite throw away. It was strange being there again. My room hadn't changed much. Still the same posters on the wall, the same bookshelf, the same creaky floorboard near the window. Like time had pressed pause and waited for me to return. After an hour or so, I went up into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. The air was dusty and warm, the kind that carries memories like static. My dad used to keep all the old Christmas decorations in storage bins up here, plus some boxes labeled in his neat, blocky handwriting. One bin near the back caught my eye. It wasn't labeled. Inside were photo albums I'd never seen before. I opened one and flipped through carefully. Most of it was black and white. Pictures from the 70s and 80s before I was born. A few of my dad in high school. A few of my mom with friends I didn't recognize. And then, there was a photo tucked into the back of the album. It wasn't placed like the others. It had been slipped between two pages, almost like someone wanted to hide it but didn't quite have the nerve to throw it away. It was a hospital photo. A young woman with a blanket draped around her shoulders, holding a newborn. My heart stuttered. She didn't look like my mom. And she didn't look like Angela, my birth mother, either. I turned the photo over. In faint handwriting it said, Melissa, March 1996. 2 hours old. My name. My birth date. My face. But the woman holding me. I'd never seen her before in my life. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just about adoption anymore. This wasn't Angela. This wasn't the story Rachel had told me. Who was this? Why did my parents have this photo, and hide it? Was Rachel wrong? I put the picture in my pocket and drove back home in silence. I didn't even play music. Just sat with my thoughts, the weight of the photo like a brick against my thigh. That night, I called Rachel again. I described the photo, the handwriting, the face. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, That's not Angela. Angela didn't get to hold you. She wasn't even in the delivery room. Then who is Melissa? I don't know, she said. But that's not your name. My throat closed. What do you mean? Angela named you Emily. The agency changed it after you were placed. Emily. That name didn't feel like mine. It felt like a ghost brushing past me in a hallway. After we hung up, I sat on the floor with the photo in my lap. Had there been a switch? A cover-up? A mistake? Suddenly, it didn't feel like I was just adopted. It felt like something had gone terribly wrong. Something nobody wanted to talk about. Something that had been buried for decades, and was only now starting to claw its way to the surface. And I was the one digging. Chapter 4. The Woman in Room 312. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't think about clients or emails or deadlines. All I could think about was that photograph and the name on the back. Melissa. A name that wasn't mine. A woman I'd never seen holding a baby that was. I knew where I had to go. I drove 2 hours back to the city where I was born and pulled into the visitor parking lot of the hospital listed on my birth certificate. The building had been renovated over the years, but the older wings still held their 90s architecture. Brown brick, narrow windows, signs that had faded under fluorescent lights. Inside, I went to the records department and filled out a request to access my birth files. The woman behind the desk was polite but firm. Unless I had a court order or was an authorized party, I couldn't view adoption records. I expected that. What I didn't expect was how fast she glanced at my ID and said, "You were born here?" "According to the paperwork," I said. She frowned slightly and typed something into her terminal. Her fingers slowed. She glanced back at me. "We don't have a Melissa last name born on that date. In fact, we don't have any Melissa born on March 18, 1996. I felt my stomach flip. What about any baby girl born that day? She hesitated. Look, I said, lowering my voice. I'm not trying to sue anyone. I'm not asking for sensitive medical files. I just want to know the truth about where I came from. That's all. She studied me for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, there was a baby girl born in room 312 that morning, but the name on the chart was Baby Girl Unknown. No parents listed. No discharge form. The file ends abruptly. I leaned in. What does that mean? It means something went wrong, she said. Or someone made it go away. I left the hospital more confused than ever. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror like maybe the answers were buried in my face. That afternoon, I called Rachel again. I told her everything. The photo, the hospital visit, the missing records. She went quiet. You need to speak to Angela, she finally said. Not through me. In person. There's something she told me years ago. I didn't think it mattered at the time. But now, maybe it does. Will she even talk to me? I think she wants to. She's just afraid. But if you show her that photo, she'll talk. 2 days later, I met Angela at a small diner on the edge of her town. She looked nervous, fidgety. But when I slid the photo across the table, her expression changed. She didn't look surprised. She looked ashamed. I was told she died, Angela whispered. The social worker said my baby didn't survive the birth. I was 17. I didn't know what to believe. I blinked. You were told. I died. She nodded. I held you for maybe a minute before a nurse took you. They said there were complications. That they needed to run tests. Then, nothing. A day later, I was told you didn't make it. I felt cold all over. And then years later, she said softly, Rachel told me you were alive. That the agency placed you with a family. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to forgive what they did. The silence between us filled the booth like a thick fog. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was still the photo. The woman holding me. The name Melissa. Do you know this woman? I asked. Angela stared at the photo. Her lips parted. I think that's Margaret Lynn. She was a nurse at the hospital. Why would she be holding me? Angela didn't answer right away. Her voice shook when she finally said, there were rumors, even back then, about babies, about adoptions that weren't legal, quiet deals, doctors who handed newborns to people they knew, especially white babies born to girls like me. My hands trembled. So you're saying, I was stolen? Angela nodded slowly. I didn't know what to say. I had walked into that diner hoping for closure. What I got instead was a conspiracy, a theft, a past that had been erased. Someone had taken me, lied to my biological mother, changed my name, given me to a different family, and now that past was clawing its way into the present. Chapter 5. The conversation they never wanted to have. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Angela, her quiet tears over coffee, her story about a baby taken too soon. I thought about the nurse, Margaret Lynn, whose name felt like the next piece of a puzzle that had been scattered and buried for decades. And I thought about my parents, the people who raised me, loved me, sat front row at every school play and championship game, and lied to me my entire life. I drove home the next day in silence. No music. No podcast. Just the road, the wind, and the rising weight of everything I needed to say. When I walked into my parents' house, Mom was at the sink. Dad sat at the kitchen table, reading the paper like he always did. It could have been any other Sunday, any other year. For a brief second, I almost turned around. Almost left it all alone. But then I looked at them and something inside me snapped. Who is Margaret Lynn? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. My father slowly lowered the paper. My mother froze, one hand still in the soapy water. I went to the hospital where I was born, I said. They have no record of Melissa being there. No mother. No discharge form. But they do have a record of a nurse named Margaret Lynn, and a baby labeled unknown. They didn't speak. So I pulled out the photo and set it on the table. My mother's face went pale. She reached for the chair, sat down slowly, as if her knees couldn't bear her weight anymore. You lied to me, I whispered. Both of you. Dad cleared his throat. We didn't lie. We just never told you. I let out a sharp laugh. That's a technicality, and you know it. Mom finally looked up. Her voice was barely audible. We didn't think we were ever going to be able to have children. I miscarried twice before we found out I was infertile. We had already started the adoption process when your name came up. I stared at her. Came up from where? She hesitated. Your father knew someone. A doctor at the hospital. He said there was a girl, 17, no family support, too young to keep a child. The doctor said she was giving the baby up for adoption. It would be private, quiet. We wouldn't have to go through the agency. So you just took me? We were told it was all legal, Dad said quickly. That the mother had signed off. That she didn't want any contact. We didn't question it. You never thought to tell me? Mom's eyes filled with tears. You were ours. From the minute we saw you. I know it sounds selfish, but we were afraid. We didn't want to lose you. And once the years passed, it just got harder to bring up. I shook my head, heart pounding. I had a mother. And you let her believe I was dead. She was told that by the hospital, Mom said. Not by us. That doesn't make it right. The room fell silent again. The kind of silence that carries years of regret. I found her, I said finally. Angela. Her name is Angela. Both of them looked up sharply. She remembers me. She held me. And then a nurse came and took me away. She spent her whole life believing I died. Dad buried his face in his hands. My God. I leaned forward, my voice steadier than I felt. Do you know how many nights I laid in bed wondering why I didn't look like either of you? Why I didn't have your hair, your smile, your blood type? And every time I asked, you said genetics were weird. You made me feel crazy. We were trying to protect you, Mom whispered. No, I said. You were protecting yourselves. There was more to say. So much more. But I stood up. I'm staying at a friend's for a while. I need space. My mother didn't try to stop me. My father just nodded. As I walked out the door, I felt like my whole life had cracked open. The parents I had trusted were now just two people who made a choice that altered the course of two families and maybe even more. But now I had names. Angela. Margaret Lynn. And I wasn't done asking questions. Chapter 6. The nurse who knew too much. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot for 2 hours. Just breathing. I stared at my phone, at Angela's contact, at a half-written text I kept deleting and rewriting. I didn't know how to be the person she had waited decades for. I didn't know what kind of daughter I was supposed to be now. So I did what I do best. I went looking for answers. Margaret Lynn. I found her name in an archive hospital newsletter from 1987, listed under birth announcements as the supervising night nurse. I found a retirement article written in 2009. She'd moved to a small town outside Ashford and volunteered at a local senior center on Wednesdays. So I went. It was a 2-hour drive. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel the whole time. I had no plan. Just her name and the weight of everything she might say. The senior center was quiet. Pastel walls. Old piano in the corner. A bulletin board with a yellowed flyer. Bingo tonight with Maggie. I asked the receptionist for Margaret Lynn. She smiled and said, "Oh, you mean Maggie? She's around back working on the garden." I stepped outside and there she was. A woman in her 70s, thin white hair, sun hat, denim apron over a floral blouse. She was kneeling next to a rose bush with pruning shears in one hand and a thermos in the other. I don't know what I expected. Someone colder. Sharper. But she looked like anyone's grandmother. I walked up slowly. Ms. Lin. She looked up. Her eyes squinted against the sun. Yes. My name is Tyler. I think you knew my birth mother. She blinked. Stood slowly. Her hands trembled just slightly as she removed her gloves. I knew this day would come, she said quietly. We sat on a nearby bench. She didn't ask how I found her. Didn't even seem surprised. I worked maternity at St. Joseph's for 32 years, she began. I held hundreds of babies. I saw joy, I saw grief. But there's one night I've never been able to forget. She swallowed. There was a girl. Angela. 17. Alone. She gave birth to a little boy. You. I felt something shift inside me. She was scared, Margaret continued. But she was ready to raise you. She had a name picked out and everything. I asked the question that had haunted me since I first opened that DNA kit. Then why was I taken? Margaret looked down at her hands. Because someone paid for you. The silence between us was suffocating. I was approached by a physician, she said. He'd arranged a private adoption, off the record. He said the mother had agreed. I didn't question it. I was told to take the baby from the nursery before Angela woke up. They had forged paperwork. I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know the mother hadn't consented. I stared at her. You stole me. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought I was helping place a child with a good family. I didn't find out the truth until weeks later. By then, it was done. I tried to process her words, but they landed like static in my brain. Why didn't you tell anyone? Go to the police. They would have ruined me. The doctor threatened to say I was complicit. Said it was my signature on the forms. I was a single woman. No money. No power. I let fear win. She looked at me then, full of shame. I've lived with it every day since. I never had children of my own. Maybe I didn't deserve to. I didn't know what to feel. Anger. Sadness. Pity. I found my mom, I said. Angela. She thought I died. Margaret's voice broke. I'm so sorry. Truly. I want her to meet you, I added, surprising even myself. So she can hear it from you. The truth. All of it. She nodded slowly. I'll do whatever I can. It's long past time. We exchanged numbers. I took a picture of her driver's license, in case I ever needed proof of that conversation. And then I left. Drove the 2 hours back with the windows down, the wind cold against my face. I had answers now. They didn't make things better, but they gave shape to the hole I'd carried all my life. Angela had been robbed of me. I had been robbed of her. But the thief had a name, and a face, and a voice that finally said, I'm sorry. It wasn't justice. But it was a beginning. Chapter 8. Becoming Whole. I didn't expect the reunion with my biological half-siblings to be anything more than a phone call and maybe awkward pleasantries. But when I stepped into their living room for the first time, 3 pairs of eyes looking back at me, I felt something like home. They looked a little like me. Shared mannerisms. The way they laughed. The way they pushed their hair behind their ear when they were nervous. Their names were Caroline, the oldest, then Daniel and Maria. They grew up knowing Angela as their mother, always talking about their older sister somewhere out there. They'd brought pictures. Family vacations, birthday cakes, graduations. And in every photo, I saw echoes of myself. Dark-haired girls with my dimples, toddlers with my hands, coffee mugs with my last name printed as a sentimental gift. We cried, of course. Caroline told me that when she first got the DNA match, she asked her husband to sit down. She thought it might be bad news. Instead, she found me. Daniel shook my hand with tears on his cheeks. Maria hugged me silently for minutes. We were siblings born from the same story, sewn together only now by the truth. But the surprise came when Angela mentioned our father again. The man I'd believed was dead, or at least irrelevant, was still alive. She'd had me in secret, left town hoping for privacy, lost contact. He found her years later. Learned about me. But by that time, I'd already been given away. He never tried to contact me, afraid it might hurt our adopted life. He lived quietly, several states away, unassuming. He wasn't the monster I expected. Just an ordinary man wishing he'd done things differently. When we decided to meet him, at a park near a lake where ducks floated in mid-morning sun, I thought I'd feel anger, shame, revenge. Instead, I felt emptiness. And something else. Regret. His voice cracked. He showed me a stack of old letters written by my mom. None ever sent. He held them out, handwritten confessions of love and longing, guilt and loss. Letters never sent to the agency or my adoptive parents, only kept in a box gathering dust. Seeing my father, holding those letters, I realized identity isn't just genetics. It's intention. The people who raised me made choices, even if they were misguided. My biological mother allowed her child to live, even if those choices were stolen from her. Even if the truth was buried, love still existed. It just needed a chance to breathe again. That chance took years, but it arrived. My relationship with my adoptive parents didn't magically heal. We met later, awkwardly, in a cafe under neutral lighting. They spoke softly, apologizing again and again. I listened and cried once. But I eventually told them, "You raised me, you loved me, though it was based on a lie. That love made me become someone. I can't erase it. I just need to know the truth now." Dad nodded, tears in his eyes. "We lose you or lose the truth. We chose wrong." Mom reached for my hand across the table. Their hands were cold. But theirs was not the only warmth I now had. I moved in with Angela and my siblings for a few months. I helped raise funds to support a non-profit pushing for release of other adoption records from that hospital. We lobbied state legislators. We shared stories online. The hashtag Lost Children of SJ grew. We organized reunions for other stolen children. I met dozens who were once lost, and were now finally found. A year later, at a small cafe where the 3 siblings and I met, I invited my adoptive parents. It was the first time we were all together in a room not defined by silence or secrets. The conversation was fragile, honest, full of pauses and second chances. They brought framed photos of me as a child. I brought recent family photos with my biological siblings. We placed them side by side. At one point, my mom asked softly, "So, who are you now?" I thought about it for a moment. "I'm not just Melissa," I said. "Not just Angela's daughter either. I'm every story I've lived. I'm the adopted girl, the stolen girl, the reunited sibling. I'm both sets of parents' daughter, because one gave me life and the other gave me love. And love, real love, doesn't vanish just because of deception." We hugged. Not perfectly. Not without scars. But real. The last shot on camera would be me closing the old photo album, the same foster album I once packed for storage, and opening a new one. Pictures of siblings, friends, cousins, the parents I was born with and the ones who raised me. A new kind of family tree, roots tangled but alive. Because the truth shattered my life. But it also rebuilt it. And I chose to become whole anyway.